here we have Nick Williams. Thanks for coming on the call, buddy. Really appreciate it.
Well, my great pleasure. I'm honoured and privileged to be invited.
No, because I want to let the audience know that I met Nick a number of years ago. It was 11 years ago now. And I was really taken by his heartfelt message and his journey from, I believe, coming out of a profession that he wasn't lost a bit of heart with. And he moved into something which was a lot more meaningful. And he told his story, and it really resonated with me. And on the back of that, I actually went solo with my work, and I've been developing my own projects and company in many ways because of some of the messages that Nick mentioned to me when I met him. So partly this is why I'm bringing Nick on. This is why I'm bringing you on. Now, could we maybe talk about, it's been a long time, the last 11 years. That particular,
what have I been up to in 11 years?
That particular talk you did was about finding the work that we were born to do. How about, could we start up there? Could we start maybe as that as the platform? And then maybe if you'd like to sort of elaborate on sort of how that's evolved for you over the last few years.
Sure. How can I summarize it really? Yeah, well, as you said, I had a corporate career that I wasn't particularly happy in, but I don't think that's unfamiliar. I think a lot of people that kind of have business and corporate careers aren't particularly happy in them, but they don't see an alternative. And, you know, there was always a voice in me that said, you know, there's something else you're here for. But like a lot of people, I was terrified to follow it. So I did follow it. Eventually, I left my corporate career. I started my own business. It wasn't plain sailing to start with. It was hard work. So I suppose, you know, what I've been doing for really probably for close on 3 decades now is pioneering in my own life. You know, is kind of moving out of my comfort zone into new areas, pioneering, going into new chapters of my own life. And as a result of that, writing books that kind of say, well, this is what I've just been through. If it's helpful, here's a book to describe what I've been through. So I'm up to 18 books so far. It's a lot of chapters.
I'm up to 2 of yours, so I've got a lot.
Yeah. But I see that's part of my role, and I think that's what we can all do, you know, both as men and women, is that as we pioneer in our own lives, you know, and kind of move outside our comfort zone and live a more authentic and real life, we can act as guides to other people, you know, because we can become a role model. And I suppose, you know, I have taken that mantle kind of a bit lightly, but I think it's true, you know, the fact that we're talking because we met 11 years ago, you know, just as I've been impacted by hundreds of people, I know I've impacted hundreds of people. So what I've been doing the last 11 years is more moving into the kind of leadership area. You know, I'm fascinated by kind of new models of leadership, you know, because obviously the classic model of leadership is command, control, defeat, judge, shame, put down, ridicule, and all that kind of stuff, so you can win. And I'm just fascinated by, you know, a few role models of leaders that I've come across who really want to liberate the best in people. They really don't want to keep them in their place. They want them to shine. They want their people to be at the top of their game. So it's like leader as enabler, leader as guide and encourager and cheerleader. So a lot of my work in the last 10 years has been around how can I understand that? How can I kind of embody that by bringing the best out of myself, and how can I encourage other people to bring the best out of themselves? So that's I don't know if that's a long or a short answer to your question.
That's a good place to start. So when you talk about leadership, is that referring to everyone's ability to be a leader, or are we talking about the people that are sort of designating themselves as a particular leader in their field, occupation, that kind of thing? Or?
A bit of everything, really. You know, certainly growing up, I had the idea that, you know, leadership was about having a position. It was about being either voted for or anointed or appointed. And about 20 odd years ago, I just heard the idea that leadership could be a choice. And it kind of blew my mind that you could just choose to lead, that you didn't have to have anybody kind of give you permission to lead. So I became fascinated by the whole idea of leadership as a choice and leadership as a calling, if you like. And I think a lot of us, you know, feel a call to make a difference, but we can easily just tip into like, who the heck am I? You know, get back in your box. You know, nobody's appointed me to lead, so who the hell do I think I am to offer any leadership? So I'm fascinated by people that choose to offer leadership. And some of those do have positions of leadership. You know, I'd work with some CEOs, I work with people that do have positions of leadership, but there are plenty of people in positions of leadership that aren't really offering much leadership, if that makes sense. They kind of just keep people in their place, and, you know, they're in it for their own gain to some extent. So I work with some people who are in positions of leadership, who are enablers and liberators of other people's talent. But I'm also passionate about people like me who, nobody's asked me to lead. Nobody has, you know, given me a job description and said, do this. It's just like there's something in me, an impulse in me that said, I want to try and make a difference in the world. You know, I want to touch people's lives. I want to share my own experience. I want to inspire people, really. That's the bottom line. I think the primary leadership the primary purpose of great leadership is to inspire people. But of course, to do that, you've got to be inspired yourself. And, you know, I've been kindling my own sense of inspiration for 3 decades now.
I tell you what, then I would love to at some point during this call talk about that inspiration and, you know, how we cultivate it and, you know, how, and bring it out, because I think that's a you know, such a brilliant.
It is, yeah. You know, it's the heart of what I've been up to for the last 30 years, and, you know, for me, the idea of calling and inspiration, they're very intertwined. You know, it's like calling and inspiration go together. And especially, calling is not a must-do. Calling is something you're inspired to do.
Inspired, and I remember something you said during the talk. It really stuck with me. It's like if you're a creative person, you can't wait for inspiration to come and just land on you. You know, you have to actually make the effort to sort of meet it halfway. And, you know, if you're creative, go to some galleries, and actually, it's a skill in a way to cultivate. It's not just sort of sitting waiting.
Sure. Would you want to get into that kind of idea of inspiration now?
I would just like to, if we could just not tie the loop on the first bit, but I would like to sort of underscore it a little bit by just mentioning with that authentic leadership, what you're saying there is everyone is a leader then, potentially, because it's about telling your story and being the one that almost opens the forest for other people to come through. It's like clearing a path for others to come through, right?
I think what I would say is everybody has the capacity for leadership.
Yes.
Whether everybody chooses to lead is another matter. You know, I certainly grew up never thinking that I could lead. You know, I felt my job was to be a follower. So I love the idea that I can, or we can, you know, we can all do it. We can all awaken ourselves and each other to the idea that we can offer much more leadership than we ever dreamed possible. You know, if somebody said to me 3 decades ago, you know, you're going to work with top CEOs, you're going to inspire people around the world and all the stuff that I do today, I'd have gone, to be honest, I'd have gone, fuck off, you know, you're crazy, you're deluded. I'd never thought I had it in me. So I think that's what inspires me. It's like none of us have really got any idea what's in us lying dormant. And that's part of what my thought leadership is about. It's like you have no idea how amazing you are. You have no idea what is in you. And to me, I make the distinction between what I would call self-improvement and self-acceptance. To me, the place I'm coming from is not like you're crap really, but you could invent yourself into something good. My belief is, you know, much more spiritual in a way, which is all of us are just incredibly rich spiritual beings inside, but it's mostly been encased by conditioning and programming and all that kind of stuff. But we can go on this path of liberating ourselves from all the programming, and that's what I've been doing for 3 decades really. It's like just letting myself out the boxes I feel like I either was put in or I put myself in. So what I love is this idea of innateness. There is so much innate in us that we can draw out.
It's like a self-revealing then, or you'd have to coin, I don't know if you've coined that, but you should, Nick, if you haven't. A self-liberating or self-revealing.
No, there was, I think it was Robert Browning who said, you know, there was a line in one of his poems, something about, you know, releasing your imprisoned splendor. You know, I think there's a splendor, there's a grandeur in everybody. It came with our creation. But for most of us, it's pretty well imprisoned. And we've been encouraged not even to believe it's there. So, you know, I'm not wanting to be grandiose in as much as I tell everybody they're amazing, and, you know, they are, but it's not always easy to get it out, you know. It's a lifelong journey to liberate our own brilliance, if you like.
And maybe we can touch upon, you know, maybe how that journey looks like and some of the ways of sort of navigating through the terrain, and maybe some of the, you know, the psychological aspects that are trying to hold us back into our, you know, just our normal state, and it's almost preventing us from reaching that place that we truly desire as well.
Well, if you like, you know, when we talk about inspiration, I can talk about what I call if you like, the 3 signposts that we follow to find what we were born to do. And
brilliant.
You know, they seem to resonate with a lot of people.
Lovely. So how about, does it sound like a good start then if we started at inspiration?
Yeah,
That feels like a good sort of
sure.
genesis of it all.
Great. Yeah, so yeah, there's going to be, I'll share with you 3 signposts, and the first one is about inspiration. So, I'll share with you a quote that I came across, I don't know, maybe 25, maybe even longer, 25 years ago. And it says, it goes something like, when you're inspired by some great purpose or some extraordinary project, all your thoughts break your bonds, your mind transcends limitations, and your consciousness expands in every direction. Dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive in you, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. Now, if somebody said, Oprah Winfrey or Barack Obama said that, we'd all go, yeah. It was written 23 centuries ago by Patanjali, that was the founder of the Yoga Sutras. And I don't know, I could see you kind of closing your eyes and absorbing that. And when I first heard that 25 odd years ago, something went boing in me, something woke up in me when I heard that quote. And it's kind of been my guiding idea, really, for the last 2 or 3 decades, is what happens when we follow a sense of inspiration? And I certainly grew up thinking, well, only gifted people get inspired, and they only get inspired some of the time. Most of us just have to have a life of drudgery and suffering with maybe an occasional glimpse of inspiration, but certainly inspiration is not something you could bank on or build a business on or anything like that. So, a lot of what I talk about is, I suppose the language I would use is developing a different relationship with inspiration. And the relationship that I now think is the kind of pinnacle that we can have is we can become what I like to think of as a human collaborator with inspiration. So, in my thinking now, instead of inspiration being a scarce resource, I think inspiration is a really abundant resource. I think inspiration is actually talking to all of us all the time. I may be wrong in that, but I'll talk about more why we don't hear it necessarily or follow through on it. But I love the idea that, in a way, I don't know where it's being broadcast from the universe, from God, if you believe in a God, or your own deeper self. To me, it doesn't matter where it's coming from. But inspiration is like a radio frequency that's always being broadcast to all of us. And I've met so many people over the years, and I'm sure I've been like it a lot, which is, I'm waiting for inspiration to strike me. And like you said, at the beginning, it's not about kind of waiting for inspiration to strike us. It's putting ourselves in a position where we can be struck by inspiration, because it's trying to communicate with us all the time, I believe. But most of us are so busy, we're so caught up in our own fears and insecurities. So either we just don't listen to it, or when we listen to it, we go, oh crap, that could never do that. Let me get on and pretend I never heard it.
Absolutely. And so I get inspired, but not that often. It probably comes sometimes. You can wait a very long time before you feel that sense of inspiration again. So, what you talked about, you have to sort of meet, go out there and make an effort to almost tune in with that frequency, if you like. What are certain things you could do? I know in the past that if I'm low on inspiration, I'll just try and do as many different things as I can to broaden my, let's say, potential range to be able to tune into the inspiration. So I'll try many different things, and then I find that maybe something will click and I'll find the inspiration. But just to keep in motion, to keep in movement, and just to keep the options open. But is there anything in your experience to create a higher probability of connecting with that inspiration?
Sure. So here's a couple of tips. So number one is know what inspires you, and then it's kind of obvious, but if I was to wander out into, the high road up in Finchley here, where I live now, and stop people on the street and go, what are the 6 things that most inspire you? Most, half of them will probably think, I was a bit mad and call the police, because it's not a conversation that most of us have. But I think it's really important to know what does inspire us. We're all inspired by different things. I think our soul draws us to different areas, but become more aware of what it is that inspires you. And then the second thing is spend more time doing that. So when, 30 years ago, I kind of realized that I was inspired by personal growth and creativity and spirituality, I was drawn to something in London called Alternatives, which some people will have heard of, but it's still going. It's the Mind Body Spirit platform in London. And when I got involved with it, initially as a volunteer, and then I ended up co-running it for several years, it was like, it was like food for my parched soul. I would just listen to speakers that made me go, oh, we can be so amazing as human beings. We're so gifted, we're so creative. So give yourself inspirational input is one way. But then, one of probably the most important ways is to act on a sense of inspiration. Because, I did it for many years, and I know many people do. They go and do stuff that inspires them, and then they go home and do nothing about it. And I think one of the ways that we tap into our inspiration is to boldly and courageously take little steps in, I call it in service of our soul. Every time we do that, I think, like that quote says, our consciousness expands a little bit. We realize that we're braver than we thought we were. We realize we're more courageous or gifted or more talented. I've met so many people that said, well, I never thought I could speak. And then suddenly one day I gave a talk and somebody told me they were really inspired. It's like, you don't know what impact you're going to have until you start having the impact. So the third tip is act on your inspiration. Do something small. I'm a great believer in lots of baby steps, and they add up to big steps. And then I think there are other kind of practices, if you like. I don't know if do you know Julia Cameron? Have you heard of her? She's a well-known writer in the area of kind of creativity. She's an incredibly creative woman. She's written over 40 books and films and screenplays. Used to be married to Martin Scorsese, so she's been well versed in creativity. But her best-known book is called The Artist's Way, and in The Artist's Way she has a couple of practices, and one is to do something called morning pages, and that's just basically writing 3 pages of journal every morning, and I've been doing that for 10, 12 years now. And to me, that's a way of keeping my energy flowing. Some mornings I feel like I'm walking through treacle when I do it, and other mornings it's like, whoa, so many ideas are coming to me because I'm doing this thing, this practice, if you like. And other practices are things like just going for a walk regularly. Often if you hold a problem in your mind, you'll have an inspired answer to it by the time you finish your walk. And another one is things like, she calls them artist dates. But an artist date is where you just take your inner child to something that inspires you, and you find creative to kind of fill your own wells of creativity and inspiration. So I think there are, in answer to your question, there are very practical things that we can do to connect to and build a more powerful relationship with this thing that we call inspiration.
Absolutely. I had this sort of question to myself, and I was thinking, what am I inspired by? And even that's at one point was like, oh, I don't actually know. What do I even like doing? What am I passionate about? It actually took what I did is I went onto my YouTube channel. I actually looked at all the things that I liked, and I started to see a pattern of all the sorts of things.
Well done.
That was actually
brilliant.
That's all the things that I've put all the stuff I put into certain playlists, and I was like, well, that's obviously what I'm really interested in because I keep coming back to it. I'm really engaged by it. So that's actually what sort of kick-started a few different thought forms for me, and
Brilliant. And some of the language I use is and it sounds like exactly what you did, which is just notice what you're naturally drawn to. Because most of us know what we have to do, in our jobs or in our relationships. But it's like, when nobody's watching you, when there's no points to be scored, what do you naturally want to be doing? And I think a lot of people kind of discount that and go, well, that's just a hobby, that's just an interest. But I also believe that sometimes the things that we're really inspired about and by can become our careers, can become our vocations.
And could you give some examples of the sorts of, because people might hear this and say, oh yeah, but I'd really like to create a chocolate factory, something crazy, but some of these ideas aren't as far-fetched as they may seem. I'm sure I've read in your book some examples of some case studies of people that have had quite out there ideas, but actually they've taken those little steps, like you said, and actually they've actually ended up being niched it in their own industry for it. That kind of
sure. One example I use is somebody who's been a friend over the years. She tells this lovely story of I think in the 80s she was in recruitment, and she struggling with some addictions and stuff herself. She's open about it. But she went to the Royal Albert Hall to see Cirque du Soleil when they first came to the UK, and she was watching it, and she suddenly had this aha moment of remembering, and she burst into tears apparently, but she remembered that as a child she always wanted to be a clown. So she actually trained to become a clown, and now she has travelled around the world clowning in businesses, in the NHS, in all sorts of different places. She's also become a massage therapist. She lives in Ibiza now. I'm amazed at what happens when people follow their calling. Some people become successful writers, some become successful artists. But I don't think it's just about, I don't think there are some things that are more intrinsically inspiring. I think, I know hairdressers that are inspired by being hairdressers because of the conversations they have with their clients. I know painters and decorators that love painting and decorating. I remember meeting a plumber years ago who said, I love being a plumber. I get to be people's earth angels when they've got leaks and when they've got problems. She goes around and calms them down and fixes their problems. It's like, I think, again, we can open up our minds to what can be inspiring. I think there is nothing that's intrinsically inspiring, but we can bring inspiration to anything that we do.
Yeah, it's subjective as well, isn't it? I mean, what's inspiring to us is not necessarily inspiring to other people. Okay, let's take someone and they've got this inspiration. It feels like maybe quite, maybe even a left field idea, but they've got that buzz. They feel that energy. They feel that connection to something higher than themselves. Now, let's say they're worried about the restructuring of their days. They're probably in a job they don't like, but they kind of need to do it to pay the bills. Is there anything they could do to maybe to start to displace their current 9 to 5 and with their new idea? Would it be just doing things on the weekend or in evenings, or in your experience, what's a good way to sort of slowly start to introduce it?
Yeah, I'm a great believer in taking small steps, and I've been looking in the Evening Standard over the last couple of years, and there's an increasingly number. I can't remember what the percentage is, but something like 30 or 40% of people in London have what they call a side hustle, something they do because they love it, and it maybe earns a bit of money, but they're doing it on top of their 9 to 5 job. So I'm a great believer in don't give up your day job until you've got something else going, because if it's something new, you won't necessarily have a lot of confidence, you won't necessarily have a lot of experience or capability. So I'm all about gradually building up confidence, gradually building up capability, and then making it more and more center of your life. I know a lot of people that are kind of part-time coaches and part-time speakers and part-time writers or part-time online business owners because they love it. Build it up, and it may never become a full-time job, but that's okay. For me, it's about an experience of joy as well. It's like, whatever brings your soul alive, you've got to have it in your life, whether it's center of your life or an edge of your life, but somewhere you've got to have that sense of joy and aliveness and your soul singing, if you like.
Absolutely. I mean, in my experience, that's normally came when I've just taken the leap. And I tend to now, as a mantra, say to myself, I'm only going to do it once I'm ready. I'm the opposite of that. I'm going to do it when I'm not ready. Sorry, to correct myself. Most people do it when they're ready. If I say I'm only going to do it when I'm ready, then it's too late. I say I'm only going to do this project. I'm only going to do this if I'm not ready. And so I want to feel that the unknown. I want to feel that unknownness. And
Brilliant.
That's actually, for me, is playing the fool. In the tarot, playing the fool, taking that leap.
Yeah. Certainly, I love the kind of word adventure as well. Both adventure and venture. And what you're describing is kind of having a bit of an adventure. It's like, going beyond what's familiar to you and going, I don't know how this is going to work out, but it's going to be fun discovering. Yeah. So I think the idea of calling and inspiration and adventure are all kind of mixed up as well. The kind of hero's journey or the heroine's journey as well. I think
and you don't know where on that hero's journey, you might not know where you're going, but it's it's an unfolding, it's an unraveling as you're taking each step. And actually, that's the point, that's the buzz, isn't it?
Yeah, a few years ago, I read this lovely quote that said, the soul thrives on adventure. Adventure is not a luxury, it's part of our makeup. And I certainly, wasn't told that growing up. I was told to get a proper job and a sensible job and all that kind of stuff. And, wouldn't it be lovely if we did, bring up children and and tell each other, you've got to have a bit of adventure in your life, not to put your life at risk, because I think that's often happens when we're teenagers, especially young men. It's like, they want that sense of adventure, they want that sense of being alive, and they can end up doing it in very reckless ways, but really they want that sense of aliveness that we all hunger for, I think, that we want to feel like we're really alive, our life matters and we're really alive.
Yeah, that call to adventure is very, very important. I think that's partly what you talk about in your books, is about the resistance is normally there, and trying to maybe we can touch upon that, Nick, is like that call to adventure. Often we can sort of start to see resistance everywhere, and I've got the phone bill, and oh no, I've got the job or the pets or whatever it is that.
Sure, no, brilliant. And you're, you don't realize it, but you're leading in beautifully to how I was going to link in the signpost. So, so signpost number one for finding your calling is to follow a sense of inspiration. And just to go back to what you said at the beginning, don't wait for inspiration to strike. Engage with things, and then the inspiration starts to flow. So often people get caught in that trap, exactly as you said, which is, they're waiting for inspiration to hit them, rather than going, well, if I go do this, I actually might get the inspiration flowing. So just as an example, I've been writing now for just over 20 years. But it's probably only in the last 10 years, for the first 10 or 12 years of writing, it was like, well, when I've got the time, I'll write. When I've got a space, then I'll write. But about 10 years ago, it really dawned on me, if I'm a real, if writing is part of my profession and my vocation, I want to do it consistently. So literally every morning, other than when I'm ill or I've got a medical appointment or something else going on, so probably I would guess 340 out of 360 odd days a year, I will go and write every morning from 9 till 11. And I don't always know what I'm going to write about. But when I sit down to write, the inspiration starts to flow. And that's the key thing, is, you don't need to know what you're going to do before you start doing it. Engage with it, and that, if you like, turns on the tap of inspiration. But I don't think it's turned on the tap. It's more, it just connects you to the pre-existing inspiration. And I personally have no problem with the idea of there being a muse. And I kind of like the idea that I go and sit in my local cafe every morning, and the muse is sitting there waiting for me, going, okay, you're a bit late this morning, right? Turn the computer on, get your coffee, and then I'll start, giving you instructions.
And so would that muse in that regard be journaling, or could it be or is it just like, oh, I've got this idea for a project, or could it be anything, or does it start off as automatic writing where you just let the well, I was going to say the pen go?
No, for me, the act of writing stimulates inspiration. To me, there's so many dimensions of it. It's like what I want to write about, and then how it all fits together, and then how I go deeper with it. It's like, it's a mixture of inspiration, conscious thinking, and unconscious stirring the pot, if you like, and all those things together, work together to create whatever it is you're going to create. So yes, so number one is follow your sense of inspiration. That's the cleanest way to find, I think, what you were born to do. But as you rightly said, the next thing that usually kicks in is what I've come to call resistance. And resistance is like a blanket term, if you like, for all the ways that we undermine ourselves, stop ourselves, distract ourselves, talk ourselves out of things, scare ourselves. We all recognize it. Most of us don't have a really brilliant, inspired idea and go, you know what, that's a brilliant idea. I'm just the right person. It's all going to work out. It's going to be fabulous. Off I go. Most of us go, brilliant idea, obviously destined for somebody else. I can't do this. I'm not up to the job. Now's not the right time. I can never make a living out of this. We all know that mind talk. Generally it's our own inner critic. Excuse me. But I've come to call that resistance. So as much as anything, so firstly we can cultivate our relationship with inspiration, but secondly we're going to need to recognize that we are going to be hitting resistance much of the time. So part of what, my kind of, if I had a recipe for success, if you like, if I'm honest, I've now worked with some amazing people, people that I would have been in awe of, a while, even a few years ago, but now I get to hang out with them and coach them and all sorts. Everybody experiences resistance. when they're honest, So success is not about not having resistance. In a way, success is about how you recognize and handle your resistance. And it's kind of acting in the face of resistance. Like you were saying, don't wait until you're ready. By acting in the face of resistance, you grow your confidence and you become ready.
Mm.
I didn't feel ready to give my first public talk 30 odd years ago, but by going, shit, I'm terrified, but I'm going to do it, I have built my confidence up to be a proficient public speaker now. But the journey never ends.
And something I've realized that often what we fear the most is what we're like our greatest calling. It's almost wrapped in the same thing.
Precisely. The way I've come to see it over the years, because of my own personal experience and seeing it in so many other people, it is almost like, well, I think all resistance comes from our ego. And I think, what we're born to do comes from, I'd like to call it our soul. And our soul, our ego tries to wound us at our essence, through things like shame, through things like saying you're useless. Our ego will try and wound us. It's almost like, as you say, our soul is so brilliant and our ego will try and hide that from us. So yes, the bigger the resistance, usually the bigger the gift. And most people don't recognize that relationship.
Mm.
They kind of go, oh, it's obviously not right. I'm feeling so much resistance to doing it. Mm. And my kind of inclination is to say, it obviously is right because you're experiencing so much resistance. Your ego is kicking up a shitstorm to try and stop you doing this.
I mean, I actually did that. I think it's because of what you said in one of your books, but I mean, I started to write down the things that terrified me, and I started to like tick them off, and like one of them was to stand up on stage and do comedy. And that was one of the most terrifying things ever.
Yeah.
But after doing that, I actually kind of realized that it was actually something I was really good at. Well, I thought I was, but not even the jokes, but just having the presence on stage, and really feeling like I'm thriving. And I really had that sense of just being like the universe collapsed around me, and I was in this sort of tunnel of energy, if you know what I mean, this like vortex of energy.
Wow. Yeah,
and
but because you went through it.
I went through it, and I kind of, but before that, there was all that resistance of fear of like, what if I mess it up? And God, I'm going to make a fool of myself. God, it's terrifying. I'm not going to make them laugh. But actually getting in there and doing it and standing in that energy, I realized that I started to really own it and just like become with it and just like really relax into it. And I was like, God, I'm actually really good at this,
Yeah, and you love it as well.
I loved it.
And that probably comes through. I can see now as you're talking, the energy that you're talking with is like you must have loved it. Yeah. And, especially as we're talking, specifically to men here, I think, part of how my resistance showed up when I was younger, to be honest, was kind of suicidal thoughts. It was like, you're useless, just, the world will be better off without you. You've got nothing to offer. So I think what I've come to see is, like you were describing with the comedy, almost like near-death moments are actually only a fraction away from coming to life moments. That what we often, our ego will try and say, die, but actually our soul is saying, be born. So it's like death and rebirth are so close together. But our ego will try and get us to think we should literally die rather than let a piece of our ego die. So you're right. I think often the things that we think I'd rather die than do that, we are probably got a real gift for. And as we step through our fear of doing them, we shine and we radiate something because we have a gift for it. And I use this language. Not everybody would be comfortable with it, but almost like it's a soul promise. We promised to come here and do this. I think that what we were born to do is an answer to each other's prayers. What you were born to do lights up the world and makes a difference for people. What I was born to do lights up the world and makes a difference for people. And I love this idea where, the more people that are following their calling, the richer the world is. And we're all kind of waking each other up, and we're all interconnected, really. My gifts help you. Other people's gifts help me. We're all in this kind of wonderful tapestry of life.
Absolutely. And you actually wrote in the book that you signed, you actually put to John, thank you for showing up with love, and I just thought that's just it, showing up, just,
Yeah. So So one, let's just talk a minute or two more about, what is resistance and how does it show up, and then we'll talk about showing up.
Yeah. Okay.
It's such an important part. I think it's one of the most important things I've learned and that I share. So what I say to people is don't resist resistance. Usually resistance means you're right on track. If I'm coaching people, I often say, so what is it you're most trying to avoid, and what is it you're trying to talk yourself out of? What is it that inspires you that will never go away, but you're not doing it? And a lot of people just love the reframe of being able to see resistance as a pointer, not as an obstacle. And that doesn't mean it's going to be comfortable, but if inspiration's a pointer, so is resistance, as you were saying. The thing you often most resist is the thing where your heart lies, your gifts lie, your brilliance can lie, your gifts can lie. But it's understanding that's how it works, and that our ego. The way I describe it is resistance is all the ways our ego. All its petty and fearful responses to the magnificent and creative impulses of our soul. So wherever there's a soul's creative impulse, there's likely to be ego resistance at the same time. So our job is in I call it self-leadership. Our job in self-leadership is to navigate those two forces, navigate our inspiration and navigate our resistance. We're never going to, I don't think we're ever going to escape resistance. I still have it now. I've written books about it. I've talked about it for 3 decades. I still have it, but I now have a good enough awareness to go, okay, I know I'm really inspired, a bit like thunder and lightning. I've had the lightning of inspiration. Now I'm going to have the thunder of resistance. I wonder what form it's going to take this time. So I almost anticipate it. But then I can recognize it and go, yep, here it is. And it ain't going to stop me, but it's there. And I can stand, even today, I can, if I'm giving a talk in front of people, I can get really nervous about it. But then I know that as soon as I start talking, I'll be in my flow and I will love it and it will probably go brilliantly. But I still have the resistance. I read somewhere that Henry Fonda, even in his 80s and 90s, when he went on stage to perform, would throw up before he went on stage. His resistance and fear never went away. But nobody would know from his performance what he went through a couple of minutes before he stepped onto the stage. And again, that's part of, I call it kind of being more of a pro. A pro knows, oh, here's my resistance. It's trying to stop me. I'll just go through it and then I'll shine. But it's doing that enough to know that it's all just part of the process. It's not a brick wall. It's a door to walk through, if you like.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really nice way of actually seeing it from a kind of an overview of it and seeing the kind of the law of opposites in a way that have to play out if you're likely to explore the light. You have to go through a little bit of the dark. Yes.
Yeah, and one of the expressions that I've liked over the years is what resistance does is helps us grow our spiritual musculature, to build our inner strengths, so that for many of us, certainly for me, initially my resistance felt so much bigger than my inspiration. But over the years, for me, I've begun to, turn it around, and my inspiration is now so much stronger than my resistance. The resistance is still there, but it's nowhere near as strong. I've built much more inner strength over the years through all the things I've done, that I can now tackle my resistance a lot more competently, if you like. Doesn't mean it's not there. And just for a few thoughts for people about, well, how does resistance show up? One of the most obvious ways is things like procrastination. Perfectionism, forever planning to do stuff but not actually doing it. Another way I do it is, I often get into fights, or I used to, do it less now, but just as I was about to do something, I would get into a fight with somebody or get outraged and get into an argument. And I realized, I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back, that was a form of resistance because it stopped me doing the thing that I was inspired to do. For many of us, being a perpetual student can be a great way of kind of feeding our resistance. We're just going to read another book. We're just going to go on another training course. And on one level, it kind of makes sense. It's like, well, of course, I'm just building up my skills. I'm building up my awareness. So on one level, it makes sense to do it. But I did that for many years. And, luckily I had a good therapist. And she said to me one day, she said, are you ever going to become a teacher, or are you going to be a student forever? And it kind of hurt a little bit, but I knew she was doing it with love. And it was like, she was kind of saying to me, look, you could be a great teacher. You can lead, but you're frightened to do it.
You've got to get going. Yeah, you've got to sort of stop the preparation and actually start being the
Yeah. So for me to step
artist.
into leadership, for me to step into being a speaker and a coach and a writer,
Mm.
I had massive resistance to all of them. But now they're things that come pretty naturally to me, and I have much less resistance to them.
Could I just ask something on that? Because I just thought of a really good question on that. How would someone know the difference between procrastination, because they're sort of avoiding what they deeply desire, versus just really just not being energized by the project?
Brilliant. It's a brilliant question. I've thought about that a bit over the years myself, because I think not not everything that we don't want to do is resistance. So here's the key, in my mind anyway. I'm not saying this is the only way of looking at it, but if you were never kind of excited and inspired, but you tried to force yourself to do something or pressurized yourself, that's not really resistance. It's really just, I don't want to do it. I'm never inspired to do my tax returns. I'm never inspired to do exercise, but I know I need to do them. But in a way, it's not resistance. It's just like, I don't want to do it, but I know I've got to do it. But then the other way is, whether it was for a minute or a day or a week or a month, when you were really energized and excited and inspired, but then the doubts began to creep in, or you allowed yourself to kind of get distracted or go off in other directions. That's the resistance creeping in, because you were inspired in the first place.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm feeling into it, and I've actually, I've had experiences when I've had that. Wow, this is such a big idea, and then suddenly like, or maybe not. I don't know if I can do this. Yeah, that's that. Yeah. There's that energy, and there's also things like, I just want to do make an audio book about something that I'm not really interested in, but I know it could probably sell. But it's just I'm on the screen. It's like laborious. Like just going through it.
Yeah. So notice notice where your energy levels are, and notice when your energy levels were high, and then they begin to go down because of resistance, versus what you never really had energy for, but you tried to push yourself into, or other people tried to kind of push you into it, which is often what happens. To recognize resistance, and what's the ways through resistance? Lots of different ways, but if I had one kind of tip for getting through resistance, it's taking consistent baby steps. And I think what some people do is they go, well, I did something last year. And I'm kind of going, well, what did you do today? What did you do yesterday to get through your resistance? Like me, and going out to write every day. That's a consistent way of kind of acting in the face of resistance or inertia. So that's the way you build up your muscles. So, I also call it consistent acts of showing up. And for me, the distinction, and that's why I probably wrote in your book back in 2009, was the distinction between showing off and showing up. And I think what often happens is, when we have an impulse to step into leadership, or step into our creativity, or offer our gifts to the world in some way, or pursue a creative endeavor, some part of us might say, you just want to show off, you just want to draw attention to yourself. I had a Methodist upbringing, and fairly strict upbringing, and one of my childhood messages was, don't show off. So every time I went to follow my impulses, it was like, I just want to show off, I just want to I want to draw attention to myself. So it took me years, and really it was only when I became a student of something called A Course in Miracles, which is a book of kind of spiritual, kind of how do you undo fear and return to love. That's in essence what it does. And they talked about, that everybody has grandeur in them, and that our job in this world is to show up with our grandeur, really. And the grandeur is how we were created. So it made me realize that it's almost like our spiritual, not obligation, I don't like that word, but it's a spiritual impulse to show up and share our gifts. It's not showing off, it's the most generous thing we can do. I believe that if everybody on this planet were to show up and get beyond their resistance and share their gifts, we'd turn it around. We'd turn things around. It's not that there aren't enough people with enough gifts. People are playing small, they're not showing up. They've got brilliant ideas, but they're doing a hatchet job on themselves. So that's part of my impulse for doing my work, is to get more and more people to show up in the world, to share what it is that they have to give.
Yeah, why is that? Why is it that we're not? It's almost like it's not okay to be an exhibitionist. You know, somehow frowned upon, and it's like this person's, you
Well,
know,
there is grandiosity, there is arrogance. You
yeah,
know, you've only got to look at a lot of leadership, and we kind of go,
mm,
yeah, don't like
mm,
that. You know, if that's what it means to be a leader,
mm,
count me out. I don't want to do it.
mm,
But I think there are also leaders who show up who are just incredibly generous and
mm,
genuinely humble. And to me, true humility isn't playing small. True humility is saying, I would be robbing the world if I didn't show up with what I've got.
mm. It's celebrating yourself, and that should be okay to celebrate
Yeah,
your these things that you feel like you love doing or you're really great at. Like
yeah,
really let them out. I mean, I had a bit of a block where it's like I'm really good at trick shots at that pool, and I really wanted to post them up, but I was worried people would go, "Oh, look at you showing off." But I was like, "Well, you're posting pictures and videos of you with money or wealth or travel, and it's like, why can't I celebrate something that I really like doing?" You know, so I started
yeah.
putting up and actually developed a little mini brand out of it because it's
Congratulations.
out of a little something I do for fun. You know.
Brilliant. Well, again, a lovely example you're sharing of what happens when you show up.
Mm,
And so, one of my biggest tips is just show up consistently. Every good thing that's ever happened, like I showed up to give this talk 11 years ago, and now we're having this conversation. That's the magic of showing up. Incredible things happen when we show up. Not every time, but when we show up consistently and when we make a commitment to showing up, I can almost guarantee things are going to work out.
mm,
So, the final message about resistance would be there is a power in us, a force in us, whatever language you want to use, that is greater than our resistance. I think so many of us think our resistance is greater than our inspiration. But I think we all have the power to beat our resistance, but it may take time to build up that inner musculature to be able to do it. But
mm,
we are capable of doing it. Otherwise there would be no forgiveness in the world. There would be no love. There would be no
mm.
creativity. Everybody would go, nah, can't do that. My ego says I'm crap. Thank God that people do get past their
Yeah,
resistance.
otherwise you wouldn't be able to see so many beautiful things.
Yeah. So should I just share the kind of third
Hey,
navigational
yes,
thing?
absolutely.
So inspiration, resistance, and the third navigational kind of tool I share with people to find their calling and what they were born to do is what I call looking into your shadow life. If men are listening to this and have read anything about the shadow, generally, the way we describe the shadow is the disowned parts of who we are. We often think of our shadow being the negative side. We disown our anger or our competitiveness or our aggression. But I think what we also end up disowning a lot of the time is our tenderness, is our creativity, is our beauty, is our appreciation, is our ability to be kind and loving. Especially as men, we kind of go, well, they're soft things, we have to be tough if we're going to be men. So growing up, I certainly disowned so many of my good qualities, not just my kind of bad qualities, if you like. So where this specifically applies in terms of a calling is, I think what happens is because so few of us generally are encouraged to kind of follow our sense of inspiration and follow our calling when we're younger, what happens is we kind of just put a damper on it. But some parts of us cannot help but be drawn to the area that our soul wants us to be immersed in. So, I use the example from my own life. I got drawn to alternatives. I was involved with alternatives for about 20 years. And basically, I ended up hosting and promoting some of the greatest and speakers in the world of personal and spiritual growth. For those people that know Marianne Williamson or Wayne Dyer or Deepak Chopra or Eckhart Tolle, all those kind of people, Anita Roddick, who founded the Body Shop, if they were in London, they would come and speak at Alternatives. I would host them. I would meet them. So I was hosting these great speakers. I was hosting these great experts. I was hosting these thought leaders and authors. But after a couple of years, a part of me went, I've heard a lot of this stuff before. And then I discovered this idea of being a shadow artist, and having a shadow life. And it suddenly dawned on me, and this was about 1997, about 23 years ago, that I no longer want to I didn't want to be the one promoting the authors. I wanted to be an author. I didn't want to promote thought leaders. I wanted to be a thought leader. I didn't want to promote speakers. I wanted to be one. And for a while I went, oh yeah. And then my resistance kicked in big time. I went, who the fuck is ever going to want to listen to you? You know, what have you got to say? Other people can, you know, all the stuff that we can all recognize. But I realized the power of understanding a shadow life, that sometimes we end up playing second fiddle to what we'd actually like to be the star in. Did that make sense?
Yeah, so you're the what do they call it? The bridesmaid, but not the bride.
Yeah, and some people, it's really true for them to be the bridesmaid. You know, that's their calling.
Yeah.
But I think many of us are drawn to the area of creativity or leadership or, you know, production or something. But we go, oh, my job's to be the number two. I could never be the number one. But I don't mean number one as in competitive. But you know, I like the idea of star. You know, but a different way of thinking about being a star, because often we think the star is about the one who gets all the attention. But I like the idea that the star isn't the one in the spotlight. The star is the one who brings the light. So I like the idea that perhaps we can all star because we can all bring the light. So to me, it's about, you know, this idea of like, well, where are you playing second fiddle, or where are you telling yourself that you're not as good as anybody else when actually you could be? Because I could have easily talked myself out of being a writer. But here I am 18 books down the line and several bestsellers and tons of appreciation for people for what I've written. But if I went, my job is to promote other writers, not to be a writer myself, I'd have robbed myself and I've robbed a lot of other people. So it's that idea of recognizing that we're often drawn to something that we would like to embrace fully rather than support the talent of other people alone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So the shadow aspect of that, how does that fit in? So are you talking about shadow work as in working through your own resistance and pain?
Well, it's kind of, the way I think of it is like I had disowned my desire to write, or I disowned my desire to speak or to impact or to lead. So the awareness was, maybe I can inspire, maybe I can lead, maybe I can be a guide and a leader, rather than just supporting other people doing that.
It's almost like something that you've cast a shadow on that should be brought to light.
Yeah, I relegated it to the shadows of my own psyche, so I brought it to the forefront of my own psyche. But it was terrifying to do that, because part of me was going, well, who the heck am I to do that? But I started doing it and I started getting good feedback, so I haven't stopped.
Yeah, wonderful. And actually this ties the loop. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that? Because I was going to say that this actually ties the loop onto the next part. I thought would be the actual being the leader then. And actually well, yes, so, you know, just an invitation to all the men kind of listening to this, whoever's listening to it, just to think, well, what do I tell myself I have to support other people to do and that I couldn't do myself? Where am I playing second fiddle, where actually, if I'm really honest, I'd like to have a go at starring myself? So just that as a navigational question, if you like. So yes, and then back to leadership, which is, reimagining what it means to lead. And to me, a lot of leadership is about what I would call thought leadership. You know, that we lead by helping people change their mind about things, by helping open people's minds to new possibilities. So a lot of the work I do, I don't have an organization. I don't want to have an organization. I don't want to lead an organization of people. I lead by sharing ideas. I lead by sharing inspiration. And I do that by, inspiring, by coaching, and by teaching, if you like. And I do them through different forms, through writing, speaking, broadcasting, this kind of stuff, writing books. But it's really wanting to shift people's consciousness, or help people shift their own consciousness. That's what I think a lot of us are drawn to do, is we lead through ideas rather than position. Absolutely, yeah. The old image I think you mentioned at the beginning of the show was about, it was almost like standing on top looking down as this authoritarian figure, but it's almost like underneath stoking a fire, or it's like facilitating or enabling. I think you used the word enabling.
You do, yeah.
And that's a much better way of looking at it, much
Yeah, because having written The Work We're Born to Do to start with, that was my first book. I know that thousands of people across the planet are now doing stuff that they weren't doing until they read that book. So to me, the book was an act of thought leadership, if you like. You know, it was like putting an idea out into the world, and you know, it still, you know, moves me tremendously to think that thousands of people have been moved that I've never met, even. You know, and I think that's what fascinates me, that the power we have with each other, you know, that we just don't recognize. And sometimes it's just in the tiniest of ways. You know, if something that we've both shared tonight has impacted somebody listening to me, to this tonight, what a gift to be able to do that.
Actually, a friend of mine talks about what the real alpha male looks like, and we have this sort of false image in society of being like, well, machismo, and you know, sort of you know, sort of overly manly sort of qualities, and being sort of outdoing your fellow man. But he talks about the real alpha male being alpha, like the first letter in the alphabet. It's about going first, being brave enough to go first, to be vulnerable first.
Love it.
That the others could follow, you know, to create a path for others to follow. But that's what the real, and I thought that really hit home with me when he said that. It really resonated. To be alpha means to be vulnerable first, because the first person to try something new, they can get hurt. They probably will get hurt because they're the first one to do it. But once they've done it, it clears the forest. It clears the path of the forest for others to follow behind them. And I think that's really alpha, isn't it? I mean, that's truly alpha.
That's real courage. You know, and we've touched on it, and you just said it, and you know. The whole idea of vulnerability, you know, especially for men, you know, my encouragement, well, my experience is I've needed, I don't know if needed is the right word, but I have felt vulnerable over and over and over again. And especially as a man, that's something I've not found easy. You know, part of me has judged myself as being weak for being vulnerable. But I increasingly now, as I'm older, see my vulnerability as a strength, as a birthing place. Often when I feel my most vulnerable is when something new is about to emerge. You know, my vulnerability, I think all of our vulnerability can actually be a doorway. And when we are willing to go through that doorway and experience that temporary vulnerability, we do find ourselves in new territory. You know, we find ourselves in new horizons, but only because we went through the vulnerability. But when we're going through it, it feels pretty crap a lot of the time. Yes. We feel pretty crap. Yeah. So, you know, I honor men who are willing to face their own vulnerability. It's not an easy job. You know, so much of, you know, the leadership we look at around that today, whether it's, you know, Donald Trump or Boris Johnson, it's like they would do anything than share their own vulnerability. You know, they are the typical I'm invulnerable, I never get it wrong kind of things. Yeah. And I think that's just, you know, it's obviously still here, but I think it's an old-fashioned way of leading.
Very old-fashioned.
I'm a great fan of men and women who lead through being real and authentic and appropriately vulnerable.
And not even, it's not like they're preaching to people and forcing ideas down their throat. It's almost like just telling their story, shining their story out. And if that inspires people, great. That's the leadership, rather than like, this is how it's done. I'm up on stage wearing I'm looking big with my shirt and my tie, and you know, creating that false image. It's more about just being real, meeting people on the same eye level and saying, look, I'm no better than you. I just happen to be doing this cool thing, and I want to share it with you. And if you get a buzz from inspired by it, then that's leadership.
Yeah, and to me that has that kind of feeling of equality. You know, that we're all equals, and some of us have got a map, and some of us are a few feet ahead, and we can help guide and inspire others. But we're no better than them. We're just, you know, older brothers, if you like.
Yeah, that's genuine equality. It's like we're all different, and that's why we're equal. You know, because we've got different gifts to share. Love that.
Beautiful. Love it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Nick, look, would you like to mention your 18 books? or more likely, would you like to mention your services and if there's any one book that you think is like the most recent one, or something that most summarizes this, perhaps?
Yeah, well, the first one is what I'm best known for. The Work We Were Born to Do is my best known book, and you know, that I'm still very proud of, because it was my first book, and yeah, you know, it's still out there doing a job and inspiring people. my last book, one book I'm also very proud of, because it's the first book I've really written on leadership, and it's called Be Inspired, Be Inspiring, Be Yourself, and the subtitle is A Guide to Drawing the Best Out of Yourself and Others, and it's the first book I've really written about the whole idea of leadership and thought leadership. So I like that one, but also, you know, the latest one I've written, and increasingly I think I want to write more books like this, is where I'm really just sharing my own personal experience. And my latest book, which has only been out a couple of months now, is about my journey with my mum and dementia. You know, my mum is still alive. I've been to see her today. You know, she's 89, but, you know, she's got very severe dementia, and she's been in the care home for 6 years. And I'm just sharing what I've learned from this journey, because I think many of us, you know, find ourselves with somebody we love with something like dementia, and we're suddenly in a new territory, and we go, how did I get here? I've got no map for dealing with this. And that's how I felt 6 years ago. So I just wrote a book saying, well, look, this is how I've handled the last 6 years. This is what I've learned. Maybe it would be helpful to you. Here it is, you know. So that's the kind of place I want to go more and more, is just saying, look, this is what I've learned from my lived experience. And I think you alluded to it earlier, when we share our lived experience, it strikes a chord, you know. And probably more than any of the books I've written, the one it's called Me, White Lies, Mum and Tea, or something like that. I've forgotten exactly the title, but it seems to have resonated more with people than almost any of the other books I've written, because it's so personal. And that's where I encourage other people to go, and I want to go more and more, is share your lived experience. That's what's real. You know, we can talk about spiritual principles and all that stuff, but I want to hear your lived experience, and you want to hear my lived experience. What's it really been like? You know, let down the mask. Let's hear what it's really been like to be you. Then I can love you and have compassion for you. You know, but when you got your masks on, it's a bit harder. So they're my books. You know, and there's loads. They're all on my website. Can I?
Yes, please.
About how to connect. Yeah, my website is iamnickwilliams.com. iamnickwilliams.com. You can find me on Facebook. I've got a page there. Increasingly, I'm now doing stuff on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn, and I do daily videos now on LinkedIn. My kind of theme that I'm kind of doing generally at the moment is, like, I love the idea of being at the top of our game, and not as a kind of ego trip, but as the fullest expression of our talents. And I think, as we've talked about tonight, there's so many ways that we hold ourselves back, and I'm passionate about helping people liberate themselves to be the best that they are. So I call that being at the top of your game, because I think when you're at the top of your game, you'll potentially be much happier, and you'll make your greatest contribution to life. And, you know, every way that we hold ourselves back, I think we rob ourselves and we rob each other. So I'm doing that stuff on LinkedIn, and I'd love to hear from anybody direct. You know, I'd love to get feedback. So nick@iamnickwilliams.com, drop me an email, nick@iamnickwilliams.com. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, please do, because I mean, I met Nick, it was 11 years ago now, and like some of the things that Nick said back then still hold true today, and like really set me on the right path. So you know, and when I meet people, I get a sense for this person. Nick is a very heartfelt person. I remember you even said to me, I said, look, Nick, I came to one of your seminars. I really liked it. You said, well, look, you know, I'll just, you know, you jumped on a call with me for a few minutes and I just thought that's a loving thing to do, you know, just to show me that you're a real person. And that one little gesture made me really want to, I don't know, just wanted me to explore you a little bit more. And then I came to your workshop, and just that simple gesture sort of like really opened things up. So I really remember that's those little things that I really remember.
Thank you. And, well, yeah, that's how I aim to be. You know,
it shows what kind of lovely person you are.
Thank you. Well, you know, so many people have helped me, you know, over the years. You know, there would be people without whom I wouldn't be here, I don't think. You know, I would have gone off the rails in some way, you know, I think. So I'd love to return the gesture, you know, it's like you're saying, you know, sometimes it's the small stuff. It's just like returning an email or having a 5 or 10 minute conversation changes somebody's life. And if I can do that, and if we can do that for each other, why wouldn't we want to do it?
There we go. What a beautiful way to end. I think we'll end it there. Nick, all that's left to say is thank you so much, and you know, good luck with everything. And I hope
thank you for the opportunity.
I hope you continue to be at the top of your game.
Thank you very much indeed. Cheers.
Cheers.